proof-host cases. So if anyone's out there wants to take you up on that.
Well, over the years, the media have come to me, and I've made lots of documentaries, and they said, I'll make a great documentary. And the only one that came close to it was UFO Hunters Programme with Bill Burns, and we did have several police officers that I set up, but what they, in the end, they kind of like chickened out of it, and they ended up doing two American cases and I think 3 UK cases. But they also, there was one guy who came up and filmed with a great case, and he was totally edited out of the programme. So why that was, I don't know. But there should be, at some point, I have enough officers that we could do a good hour's documentary with 8 to 10 police officers who are ready to go on camera.
Right, and Gary, thanks for that. After the break, we're going to talk about the alien agenda. Welcome back. I'm talking to former detective Gary Heseltime about the subject of ufology. Now then, Gary, most people in ufology know what the word disclosure means. This is begging the government to tell the public the truth about UFOs and what they know about secret files and this kind of thing. What do you mean by the alien agenda?
What I mean by that is that 2 years ago, in the mainstream media, and this is the BBCs of this world, put out a big scientific thing saying that within 20 years, with the advance of new radio telescopes coming online, that they were going to find an intelligent signal within 20 years. So that was 2013. So in a sense, I think that starts the disclosure clock ticking in the mainstream. So at the very latest date, we're looking at 2033. So we're already 2 years into it. So for me, what I see happening is there's an alien agenda in the sense of the mainstream media, and I think it's going to be kicking and screaming, are going to be dragged to look at and re-examine the UFO subject, because they're going to have to confront it, because we are probably going to be the generations that are the first in human history with official contact. So let's say it gets to 2033 and they say, yeah, we've got an intelligent signal. Well, the reality is that unless they've started to prepare for that eventuality, which I'm sure they will have in the years that come, they'll have to redress the whole subject. But say they get to 2033, they could have a situation where a radio telescope says, yeah, we've got an intelligent signal, we're pretty happy that's an intelligent signal. Well, what if that signal from the other end goes, okay, we now realise we've been listening to your broadcast, you now made contact, we'll see you next week. All right.
Now, let me just interject there, because in my opinion of that, they're saying we will probably have, or we will have contact from ETs by 2033. Now, in my opinion, whichever way you look at it, it's a lie. And I'll tell you why.
Yep.
Because if what you believe to be true is true,
yep,
that UFOs have been in our airspace for
absolutely
at least decades,
yep,
they're bound to have had signals from them with their surveillance program,
yep,
which means they've already had a signal, which means they're actually lying about 2033. They've already had signals. So that's one possibility.
But that might be the date that they've officially set to get rid of this problem.
Yeah. Now, if they haven't already had signals, how the hell would they know they're going to have a signal by 2033? So it would be a lie on that count. So I don't trust anything that comes from the official sources.
Absolutely.
Probably less than you do.
But my point...
You're trying to read into what they're saying.
Yeah, my point is when the mainstream starts saying something in a fixed amount of years, i.e. within 20 years we've got an intelligent signal, it means that even by their own standards, they've set a clock running. Because it's like the boy who cried wolf. You've set a time limit, you've got to deliver. So by 2033, they've said they're going to get a signal. So they're going to have to start preparing for that eventuality. And this is where I'd say it'll be kicking and screaming, because they're then going to have to re-examine in the run-up to 2033 all of their attitude towards UFOs, because they may well be dealing with them the next year. And that, but the reality is, if they're not prepared, say it does happen in 2033, this alien race could say, yeah, we realise you've now picked us up, thanks for that, we'll now start speaking to you, we'll see you next week. Now they may be 1 million years ahead of us in technology, so for them they can make that 1 million years in a week. Now how would the Earth be prepared for that? Totally underprepared.
Yeah, the way I look at it is they've got 18 years to get their disinformation prepared.
Absolutely. But it's an interesting... I just think it's a time frame that they've put on themselves.
Yes.
Why?
Yes, I see. And just to reiterate, I don't think disclosure can come from a government, or at least the governments we have now.
Yeah, I think the way governments are and the way America dominates the subject of ufology, I can't see us having a breakthrough in the mainstream at all. It'd be nice if ET decides to show us, but there may be reasons why they don't, or certainly that I suspect there's many species involved in this, and that would account for why we have so many diverse types of craft seen. When we look at animal mutilations, possible human mutilations, when you look at crop circles, it's all a facet by perhaps many species.
Okay. And you also, in your latest issue of the magazine, have written about another, we might call it mainstream disclosure, and that is NASA talking about water on Mars again.
Yeah.
So just give us a summary of that, and then I'll give you my sort of angle on it.
Yeah, no. What I find fascinating is I think NASA lies about everything, and it could well be disinformation. But I do think we probably found life in the mid-70s. I think it was Gilbert Levin, the scientist, said that he had a test that was, I think, from the Viking land in 1976 that proved life was there. He expected it to be all on the news, and then it was covered up.
He may have proved that life was in the Canadian Arctic, but carry on.
Yeah, maybe so. But what I'm saying is, when the mainstream start saying, we've now found liquid water, which all of us that are kind of like non-mainstream have thought, well, there's bound to be liquid water in there if you've got ice and whatever. It's now the trickle effect, and over the last couple of years it strikes me that we're getting to see more of this trickle effect of the mainstream kind of preparing the groundwork for the public to be told, yes, there is life. It might be microscopic life from their point of view, but then again, if you then add that to what they're saying about the radio telescopes and an intelligence signal, this is taking it beyond just microscopic life. There are all these kind of equations that saying life is probably teeming in space, which is what we suspect already. We already know that they're coming here. I'm absolutely happy to say that they are coming here. But from their point of view, they're now just dipping their toes into the water, as it were, and I think it's all part of a gradual, whether it be disinformation or otherwise, it's still a kind of a gradual release of information that life is out there and it's probably teeming.
I have noticed that Brian Cox has said similar things.
Yeah.
He keeps saying, do you think there'll be microbial life discovered on Mars or in the solar system? Do you think microbial life?
Yeah.
So it's as if he's been programmed to keep saying that word.
Yeah.
Even though, according to NASA's own images, there's a crinoid fossil on Mars, and which is not microbial life. It's a thing which swims around the ocean. Look it up, crinoid, right?
Yeah.
What's it doing in the NASA photographs? So I'm in two minds. I don't know whether that's the NASA photographs have been taken on Mars. I've said it several times.
Well,
75% it was taken. They were taken on Earth. So
I certainly think some of them are taken on Earth, and they certainly are not dealing with for me, the images that are purported to be on Mars that get me the most are not the ones that are in rocks or whatever. It's the flying ones. If something flies through the screen over multiple shots taken 4 minutes, 8 minutes apart, then that's clearly something in the sky. Now, NASA just don't talk about these very credible cases where objects are seen against the backdrop of mountains. So this is below the sky level, and it's, I think there's one case where there's 4 objects all in a line against the backdrop of Mars mountains. So this is clearly below the mountaintop level, and these should be explained, and they just don't say anything about it.
I did see one of like that. I don't know if it's the one that you've seen, and it looked like a bird, but on closer examination it was a repeating artifact, so it was something on or near the lens, right?
Well,
so
I've looked at many of these images and gone to the actual image reference, and they're often taken 4 minutes apart. So if you've got something it turns up in 3 consecutive photographs from different angles over a 12-minute period, then something is clearly flying around there. And NASA just don't explain these. They just don't say anything.
The images of Mars are fascinating wherever they've come from.
Absolutely.
And it's evidence that's been put from NASA to the public.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they're of or where they're from, but many of them show these anomalies. Absolutely. And they don't seem to be some barren, lifeless planet in many of the images. Absolutely. And when I managed to get communication with the chief engineer of the Mars Curiosity program, and he agreed to answer all my questions, this was one of the things that we put to him. Andrew Johnson sent him links to several of the unexplained images that he's encountered. So we weren't saying they're not from Mars, we weren't saying that they represent life. We're saying, wow, we can't explain this. What's NASA's explanation? And they've never put out detailed explanations for many of the anomalous images. That's the point, isn't it? And
it's the deafening silence. Having said that, NASA's whole attitude to anything, questions on UFOs, space and whatever, is basically say nothing. Because if they say something, they then have to defend it when people research what they've said. And so by saying nothing, it's actually a very clever ploy.
It's a classic police tactic, Gary.
Say nothing and then you can't get condemned either way.
Right. All right, and we'll continue this after the break. Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltime, who is the founder of UFO Truth magazine. And as part of that, you organise these quite big conferences every year. I was at the last one, I was at the one before that, and I've been to many other UFO conferences and similar sort of events. And I'm now convinced that at these events are what would commonly be termed spooks. I'm absolutely convinced that there are certain people who are trying to manipulate and steer things, and other people who are perhaps just recording what's going on. And I could sit here and name probably half a dozen people who I consider were of that in that category at your conference, but I can't name them because I haven't got absolute proof. I've only got some circumstantial evidence. But what's your thought on it, Gary?
Well, put it this way, logically, if you were interested in finding out what was going on at UFO conferences, it would make sense for you to plant people into the audience as just ordinary members of the public. So that's, to me, as a former detective, perfectly plausible ploy. Now, funnily enough, as you say that, there was a guy who sat on the front row of the conference for 2 days, and of course, because I'm the host and introducing people, I'm at the front of the stage a lot, so perhaps I notice more. But there was a guy that was sat there, and every time I looked at him, he had his legs crossed, he looked bored silly, he weren't even really looking at any of the lectures, and I'm thinking, why the hell are you there? You know, and it's only because I'm the host, and I literally don't get the time, but I meant to go up to him and say, are you all right? Because he just sat there with his legs crossed, he looked absolutely bored silly, as if he was there not for his own choice, somebody put him there. But it looks most bizarre.
All right.
So maybe, who knows?
Right. Okay.
I kind of think that these things go on, but there's little I can do about them, so I kind of just accept that it's going on, but I can only concentrate on what I'm doing. But I'm very wary of people who can try to manipulate you. And certainly historically, when you look at some of the major organisations, NICAP, and I would even say the BUFORA, was infiltrated from skeptics from within, who then destroyed the credibility of the organisation. So I think that's the classic way that it's been done in the past. And I think you like to remain independent. I like to remain independent for that very same reason, that I haven't got to report to anybody else. And nobody's going to deflect me away from telling what I perceive as the UFO truth.
I think from what I picked up, one of the strategies is that one or more of the speakers might have part of the content of their talk is disinformation, which you're not going to be able to control and vet every piece of information which is put before the audience. And I think some of the audience are encouraging or making sure that the disinformation is carried well throughout the audience. You see what I mean? So they've possibly got people, the speakers or audience, or both working together to influence. And then there's also the monitoring and feeding back, which I think Graham Birdsall used to actually greet the
I think he used to say there was two there always at his conference, and he'd go up to them and say hello. Just to point them out.
Right. So one of the themes at next year's conference is Best of British. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's an idea I've had for a while, and now because we're getting to a stage where we're having bigger audiences, and I'm getting confident that we can pull off a good, entertaining conference for 2 days, is that I think the time has come where we should really be kind of celebrating the best of some of the British cases that we've had literally since the Second World War, and indeed some of the classic cases through the war. So one of the things that I will be doing, regardless of other speakers, and obviously there will be other speakers announced in due time, but I will be doing a lecture on one day, on the Saturday, and a lecture on the Sunday, where I do an A and B presentation about the best of British cases, and I may expand that to include the best of Scottish cases, best of Irish cases, so we'll just see where that goes. But that's going to be like a sub-theme for the conference, is that I think it's time that we started telling the real story of the best evidence, because one of the things that came out from a conference, and it came out of actually the UFO Mastermind quiz, which is something I'd never tried before, don't think it had ever been done in any UFO conference before, but I did it just as a kind of light-hearted, but the serious thing is to test the audience knowledge. Now, lots of people came up to me and said that was a great idea, but we wanted to know more. So I think there's a lot of people out there, and of course with all the millions of websites out there on UFOs, there's so much disinformation out there. I think a lot of people actually don't know the wheat from the chaff. So one of the reasons why I think that this is a good time to do it is to address that and start saying, these are the best cases that we've had in the last 70 years, and you should be aware of them. So it increases the audience knowledge.
Right, yeah. I don't think there's anyone can claim to absolutely know the wheat from the chaff.
No.
There's so much chaff about.
Yes, there is so much chaff about. But we must attempt, from what we know of the best cases, to try to tell that best story. And I don't think anybody has addressed that ever at a British conference yet.
So you had some audience participation in the last conference, which was very successful, and I think we underestimate the audiences in some of these conferences.
Absolutely, and one thing that came really clear from the UFO Mastermind quiz was that they wanted to know more, and in fact lots of them said, we want to know the answers to your questions, we didn't know them, and that kind of surprised me, because I didn't think the questions were that hard, but they clearly did, and the contestants actually struggled quite a lot. So it kind of gave me an idea of where a lot of the audience is, and I think that's because there's so many sites out there, they really don't know what they're looking at, and they need some kind of guidance as to what is the best, or what's perceived to be the best of cases.
Right. And quite often audience members will come up with gems of information as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's one case, I recently did a conference in Truro, and a guy came to me with an anecdote about the Queen, believe it or not, but I'm not going to tell you that yet, because I've asked him to come back to me so I can fill in more detail. He did tell me an anecdote, but I said, before I go on to that, you need to supply me with a bit more information. But it was Queen and the UFOs, put it that way, which was interesting, but a very interesting thing happened. You get some really strange things happen over the years. Quite unexpected. My wife was, during the first day of the conference, an elderly lady apparently just popped into the reception area and just gave, it turned out my wife, this old magazine. And she said, my husband's dead, but he used to be interested in the subject, thought your husband might like this. Well, sure enough, there's this magazine, and it's in pristine condition. It's from 1955, and it's called The Flying Saucer News, which I'd never even heard of. So straight out of this, so I said, has she left a telephone number? Yes, she has. Cutting a long story short, I went to see her, and it turns her husband out had been a photographer for the Huddersfield Examiner newspaper for about 25 years, till his death, retirement and death. But basically, he'd always had a passion for UFOs, and he'd been one of the founder members of this. And it turns out that this was a mixture of the Flying Saucer News was an amalgamation of two clubs that basically come together in 1954, come together to produce this short-run little magazine, but in pristine condition. And what a marvellous lady, kind-hearted gesture, fantastic.
And other audience members provide sort of, well, I'm not sure whether it's satirical or whether it's flattery or what have you, but it's a cartoon.
And that's us, the Men in Black, as it was said to me.
The Men in White. Men
in White, yeah, absolutely. but yeah, no, I like that. But yeah, you do get people coming up to you of all walks, and I like all those things.
Right.
It's what makes conferences. And obviously, cutting the laughter aside, one of the main things about conferences, and especially Homefirth, because some people have said to me, well, maybe you could get a venue now for 500 people a day. But the thing is, I could probably go to a bigger venue, fill 500, but it'd be in the middle of nowhere, and you would have no infrastructure around it. Whereas in Homefirth, all the shops and restaurants and cafes are literally on your doorstep. So it's a fantastic venue, so it's not going to move from there. But what I may do is have 2 conferences a year and start to do a southern conference in maybe April, May, and then the main magazine conference in Homefirth in September.
All right then, Gary. That's all from the Men in White for this week. Thanks for coming in again. And
You're welcome.
I'm sure we'll see you again. But until next week, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm the Men in White. Good night.